Hi, my name's Ellie. Thanks for joining me today on this very cold, windy, wet, just plain angry day in Australia. Goodness, the weather is all over the place. And my dog is out there having a puppy party. And I do suspect it won't be a very long puppy party because the poor lady who's got all these dogs together at the dog park is probably fighting today's weather. So you've got me here with my beautiful, nice, hot cup of coffee that I've just made for myself. And I wanted to talk today about the Hopi Prophecy or Hopi Prophecy. Actually, Hopi Prophecy is probably more accurate, which is the indigenous American Hopi tribes, primarily scattered across the northwest of the country, north and northwest of the country, across those states. The prophecy is at probably more than 1,000 years old, but to be conservative, let's just say it's up to 1,000 years old. I'm going to include the Human Ascension with Ellie hour-long video called The Real Hopi Prophecy in the description box, that video. In particular, the stone or the rock that shows the transition for humanity and the two different directions that it can go into. I'll make sure that that is available as a link in the description box for today's show. However, I wanted to kind of go through the beliefs of the Hopi tribes and just do a bit of a refresher because I think that there are themes coming out of it that may be relevant to our current dilemma as humans. I'm currently looking at lots of different disciplines and belief systems in order to try and determine where they all might converge when it comes to various different questions that we have about reality and where we're going in the future and what the messages might be that we might want to pay attention to in order to design the future that we want, rather than kind of wait for some miraculous event where it's just handed to us on a platter, because I do suspect that it's our job to design our future and to make it possible. So I've always wanted to go back and have a look at the Hopi Prophecy in more detail. So the prophecy itself has been passed down through generations. It's not been put in writing specifically because the prophecy, it has in ways that have occurred in more recent years, but originally it was passed down orally. It was passed down through song and through tradition, and elders would speak, tribal elders would speak of it with the rest of the tribe. And it talks about the way that humanity has been created in a variety of different worlds. And it also talks about how humanity should reside here on Earth in harmony with nature and spirit. The teachings of the Hopi tribes were originally passed down by a figure that's referred to as Masao. Let's call him Masao. He is quite an enigmatic figure, and he's foundational to Hopi prophecy and cosmology. He's considered to be a feared and revered figure that is the guardian of the earth. And he's also referred to not only as the guardian of the earth, but also the keeper of the fourth world, which is the world which I'm going to describe in a moment that we currently live in. He's also considered to be the Lord of the dead, and he's depicted in Hopi tradition as being a skeletal, quite frightening and terrifying looking fellow, but he's very wise, and so looks can be deceiving in that respect. He embodies the paradox of life, which is very similar to what I saw written in the Gnostic poem called Thunder Perfect Mind, which I'm also going to attach in the description for today's show. It's a poem that talks about the paradoxes or the duality of what appears to be a feminine voice. Things like death and life and destruction and renewal and fear and love and hatred and reverence and all sorts of things all happening at once, which it demonstrates the contrast between lightness and dark, because the light can't be seen unless it's compared against the darkness, and vice versa, and things like that. And this is something that seems to appear a lot in lots of different belief systems. When it comes to Masao, I'm going to totally butcher his name, sorry. When it comes to Masao, I will get beyond this bit. There's no exception there. And so that's the reason why he has this terrifying, almost grotesque type of physical appearance that made many tribal members, when he first appeared, to fear him quite a lot. But those that remained learned quite wonderful wisdom and teachings. And that's where this prophecy has come from. He also represents things like fear and protection. So he has spoken of the worlds that humanity lived in, which are the first, the second, the third, and now the fourth world. There have been a variety of lessons from previous lost worlds in which the Creator allowed humanity to live and gave instructions on how to live to humanity. But humanity somehow lost that message, because we do that, don't we? We kind of start off pure, and then we seem to get a little bit overly confident and start to go off in a direction where we believe that we know what we're doing, but we've lost our connection to the original teachings. In the first world, which was called Tokpela, now that means the first world actually, and its indigenous name actually means endless space. And this was a world where it was born out of purity. But as time went on, the humanity turned away from the Creator. And so this world was consumed by fire and destroyed. It was replaced with the second world, which is referred to as Tokpa, which means dark midnight. This world became almost like an ice age, very cold and disconnected, and ultimately it crumbled into ice. It was then replaced with the third world, which I'm really going to have trouble with, and this is Kazkurza, I think, which means disorder and chaos. In this world, which sounds a little bit like this lost civilization of Atlantis a little bit, and that's the reason why I'm talking about these worlds. There's so much overlap between various different cultures and mythology, folklore, belief systems, and also discoveries, that there seems to have been a previous overlap in the description relating to the flood story that appears in the Bible, and this is no exception. This third world of disorder and chaos involved the rising of great cities, and humanity was very proud and had such promise in this third world. There was a lot of advancement and a closeness to the Creator for a long period of time. But then that pride mutated into arrogance and corruption. And the Creator ultimately became angry and destroyed that third world with great floods. Can you see? I mean, the Australian Indigenous tribes have exactly the same kind of story. They discuss it in a different way, and they use plants and animals to tell that story. But it's still the same. And actually there are early writings in China, in India, and here in North America as well. Not here in North America, I'm in Australia, but in this story in North America. It just goes to show that despite their ancient roots and the fact that they were so geographically displaced from each other and so distant from each other, a lot of the indigenous cultures have a very similar memory of what the earth endured in the past. And one of the reasons why I find the Hopi tribe to be, and its belief system to be so fascinating, is because it has quite a really well articulated description of some of these events from the past and memories from the past. So let's carry on. We're currently now in the next incarnation, which is the fourth world, Tawakuchi world. Now, the Tawakuchi world means the complete world. We're given abundance by the Creator. We're given guidance, and we're invited to live with simplicity, humility, balance, and with a closeness to nature. We're given all of the tools that we need for self-sufficiency and spiritual alignment. And we've been advised that if we live with these principles, we could continue forward. This is important guidance in order for us to be able to live in harmony with the earth and with each other and with nature. And we're advised that even when we are pushed by the dominant culture to go another way, we should stay close to the original teachings handed down. Because how we live is going to determine what happens to us down the line and what happens to us when we pass from this life. There is also the promise of a fifth world, but let's just say it's not a promise. It's more of an idea of a fifth world that could be waiting for us, except it's not guaranteed to us. We have to earn it. And every single person who lives in this fourth world must earn their right to enter that fifth world. Each of us has a choice about how we respond to things. And now we are currently in a moment of dilemma and crisis because the fourth world is severely imbalanced against or out of balance against the teachings that were handed to the Hopis. The way that it's described is that fires are raging and waters are rising and hearts are divided. And these play directly in opposition to what we should be doing, how we should be living. To return to a balanced state so that we can transition into the fifth world as individuals. So forget about the collective. This is a one person at a time kind of endeavor. We need to remember who we are. We need to go back to our roots. We need to go back in time and think about the original teachings and what our responsibility is as sort of proxy guardians of the earth. And we need to tap into the truth. Now, this is something else that sounds quite Gnostic to me, which is why I find the Hopis quite fascinating. The Book of Mary in Gnosticism, which is the teachings given to Mary Magdalene in her account from Jesus directly, also talk about tapping into the truth. And what Mary says is that Jesus told her that everything that we experience in the material world or on earth in this existence is generally a distraction, that the truth is something that resides inside us. And that truth is the only thing that really exists. Everything else is kind of like a mirage. And once we find that truth, we'll be able to see through everything else. And we will also understand how to allow the dark forces that continue to distract us to fight each other until they basically destroy each other and we're free from that darkness and can transition into a state of light, of pure light or enlightenment. Well, this is very similar because what the Hopi belief system is that we need to tap into that truth. And if we fail to do that, our cycle of existence will end. So this is not something that you wait for someone else to do. This is something you do for yourself, which is immediate self-empowerment, which I really like because, I don't know if I want to put my trust in other people to be able to enlighten me and to save me. I like to have the idea that the steering wheel is mine and I can do with it as I please, but I have to take responsibility for myself and my future. And there is promise there if I choose wisely. So I think it's actually a very positive message. So Masao or Masor, gosh, I can just imagine everyone will be correcting me, but that's okay. Masor. Actually, Masor sounds quite good, doesn't it? Maybe it's Masor. I'm going to butcher this constantly. Sorry. He was easily feared, but he was a very powerful guardian presence, and he offered a path of integrity. So he offered very much like the moon card in tarot, where there's a time of chaos and distraction, that the dog and the wolf are barking at the eclipse. There's also a path of integrity, which is the path of truth that's followed by the individual that you can see crossing through the center. And while they're busy, distracted by the eclipse and the droplets of distraction and chaos that are falling down, they have an opportunity that they're missing to pass through to their enlightenment along that narrow path. And that is very similar to what Masao is teaching as well in the Hopi tradition. It's an ancient belief system that is probably at least 1,000 years old, long before anything was written by the tribes. And so, it's passed down by song and by carvings and word of mouth. However, as ancient as it is, it does potentially have really modern urgency. And there have been tribal members tribal elders that have risen every now and then to speak about that urgency. I believe, because I'm a prophecy chaser, I believe that there are clues in this prophecy that appear in the 9 signs, exactly the same way that I feel that there are clues that appear in the prophecy that I saw in the 1980s and also Bible prophecy. And I'm not convinced that the traditional interpretations of any of the prophecies that people see are necessarily accurate. Because generally when people are interpreting prophecy, they're looking at it as though it's events that will unfold. I look at it differently. I look at it as events that appear as points of intersection, points of potential interference. And just like in quantum physics and the neural pathways that spark our learning and our memory process, every time you get to an intersection, there is a choice to be made. And I believe that prophecy is an indication of those points of intersection where humanity, individually and collectively, probably collectively more so because the prophecy is a collective thing, have an opportunity to tilt in one direction or another direction, or maybe even in another direction. I think it relates to the space-time, multi-dimensional complex system that we've been discovering, where the present and the future and the past all coexist and are all happening at exactly the same time. And somewhere in that, we have, whether it's from the future or from the past, created the clues that we can follow to design our destiny. The 9 signs of the death of the fourth world approaching were believed to be quite specific. And I'm going to go through them the way that they have been interpreted so far. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to have another look. The first sign was the coming of white-skinned men. Well, this is the men who took the land that was not theirs and struck their enemies with thunder. This is interpreted to have been the arrival of Europeans and the use of firearms against the tribal people that were residing in what is now North America and the United States. I do suspect that the interpretation is probably quite accurate there because it's very specific. The second sign is the spinning wheels filled with voices. This has been interpreted to be a reference to covered wagons with pioneer settlers across the land, bringing new ways of living and displacing the indigenous cultures. The spinning wheels would have been the wagons and the voices would have been the pioneers in those wagons or on those wagons talking to each other and making it appear as though the carriage is speaking itself, which would have been quite an unusual experience for an indigenous tribal culture that had never seen anything like that before. And so there is the possibility that that's a correct interpretation. The third sign is a strange beast that is like a buffalo but with great long horns. This is understood to symbolize the introduction of cattle and cattle ranching and the transformation of the land. The fourth sign is the snakes of iron, and this is kind of a poetic image which appears to be relating to, or has been interpreted as relating to, the construction of railroads, which were made of iron, and they cut across the land looking like snakes. They also altered the ecosystem, and also the traditional way of living as well, because with the railway transport, then the land was cultivated differently and trade began across different regions, and it just changed the way that humanity sustained itself from the resources of the land. The fifth sign was a giant spider web crisscrossing the land. Now this originally was commonly believed to be interpreted as the introduction of telephone and power systems. So telephone lines and electricity lines across the land. Later, as the internet and technology began to kind of connect us to each other, it was interpreted as being related to the connection of us through technology and the internet. And I think that there's something that's missing in the interpretation here a little bit, but it kind of pulls me closer to the more recent interpretation of that being technology based. But I'll get back to that later. The sixth sign is rivers of stone that make pictures in the sun. And this is interpreted to be the construction of highways and asphalt kind of areas of road, which reflects the heat and reshapes the landscape. It's more like a manufactured or industrialized kind of landscape, which interacts differently on the circumference of the earth. That reflection of heat and light of industrialized surfaces may very well be something that has led to different weather patterns or temperature changes across the earth. We don't know. The seventh sign is the sea turning black and many living things dying. This is quite a chilling image, and it's been interpreted as being related to oil spills and oceanic pollution, causing or leading to things like ecological devastation on a massive scale. So we are polluting the earth. We are. The industrialization, the creation of stuff, you can call it packaging, but even not even just packaging, the laptop that I'm currently working with, or the desktop, or the lamp, or the microphone, or anything that's been created by industry, once it no longer serves its purpose or has stopped working and we can't get parts for it anymore, or something like that, where does it go? It has to go somewhere. It can be recycled in some respects, but recycling is a little bit misleading, because recycling tends to use part of the substance and supplement it with more new stuff. So regardless of what we do, when we change something from its natural state into something else, we are contributing to more and more impact towards some kind of ecological sort of destruction. And because we're human, and there are 8 billion of us in the world, regardless, as we populate and as we continue to want to live and thrive, whether it be partly modernized or fully modernized or in an advanced state of modernization, we're still having an impact on the earth that's different to before. The eighth sign is youth with long hair joining tribal nations to learn their ways. This has been traditionally seen as being the counterculture movement from the 1960s and 70s, where young hippies were seeking spiritual truth and indigenous wisdom, wanting to return back to a natural state of peace and love. And the ninth sign is a dwelling place in the heavens that falls with a great crash, appearing as a blue star. This has often been linked to something that occurred in 1979, which is the fall of Skylab, which some witnesses described was glowing blue when it fell, But this ninth sign is an important sign because it marks, in particular, the blue star. The blue star signifies the beginning of the day of purification. And the purification is something that is where the earth kind of divides into two. Metaphorically speaking, or actually, I don't know, but it divides into two. It's a spiritual and a physical reckoning that precedes the birth of the fifth world. And this is where the Hopi prophetic stone comes in, which is what I covered in my previous episode about the Hopi prophecy. The description of the stone shows that there are certain events that take place, which I won't go into detail today, but you can always link on that previous video to have a look at the detail. And humanity is given choices. If we choose a certain path, we will continue into the fifth world. It's on an individual basis. If we choose the alternate path, then our world will end, and so will our cycle. And there is the return of spirit, and depending on where spirit comes from, it will either be met with destruction or with a far more pleasant kind of transition into the fifth world. But ultimately, there will be a transition, and no individual, regardless of who they are or how powerful they are or how much money they have to be able to invest in a bunker underground in New Zealand or wherever they think is safe, they will not be able to escape because spirit knows and sees all. And the return of spirit will weed out every single person who has taken the wrong path. That path I wonder about because we often have a kind of an automatic understanding that it's between being a good person and a bad person. But I'm not sure that it's that simple anymore. I think that it has to do with the energy around us. And sometimes we think we're good and we become kind of self-righteous, or we sit in an ivory tower of thinking and decide that because we're not being beast-like, like those beneath us, then we must be much better people. But just having that judgment might automatically put us into a different camp. I wonder about that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm continuing to look to try and understand. The reality will split into two. And one world will end and the other will continue as the fifth world. I want to take a look at this and look at the 9 signs a little bit differently to see, because there's nowhere that I was able to find that shows that they happen consecutively. And so I wanted to kind of question some of them to see if perhaps they appear in a different order. And so I haven't changed the order a lot. I've tweaked it a little bit to see if it makes sense when it's when the signs are consecutively stated differently and it's aligned up against other prophecy. So the first one being the coming of the white-skinned men, that's quite self-explanatory. And so I'm going to leave that one alone as potentially being accurately interpreted in the modern context. The spinning wheels filled with voices, well, that could be carriages filled with people. But what if it was something else? Because spinning wheels might be flying discs, and those filled with voices could be referring to telepathic messaging. And so I'm wondering whether we've taken the easy route there and looked at it from the perspective of carriages with people inside them. Could it be something even earlier? Could it have been linked to things like visitation or abduction or visions or sightings of some kind from the very early ancient times of tribal existence? Can it be, for example, even more recently, when the Hiroshima bomb event occurred in Japan, and the universe and the earth felt for the very first time the reverberations of humanity's nuclear capabilities, the number of sightings that people began to experience began to increase. And this has kind of exponentially continued since then. Despite the fact that the Hiroshima bombing occurred in the 1940s, there have been times when there has been the threat of what appears to be a nuclear escalation, and orbs or unidentified objects have been seen in the skies of the areas where conflict is taking place. And I wonder whether that might be related to the spinning wheels. We have made an assumption. That's the thing. When we interpret something, we kind of make an assumption based on what we know. But if we're not taking something that we don't know or don't believe in into consideration, then we can't look at it with everything in mind. And so I do wonder whether the spinning wheels with voices might actually be something coming from the sky that is spinning, that sends messages out there, and maybe that was a very early clue, even before the white-skinned men came to the land. Just kind of makes you wonder. The strange beast that looks like a buffalo but with long horns, I mean, I don't know what else to think of apart from cattle, and so that probably is cattle from the settlers that began to change the way of life and can change the interaction between humanity and the earth. The snakes of iron might very well be the railways, because iron is a man-made substance. Well, it's been used by humanity in a certain way that we understand, and so it likely is related to something like the railroads. But the rivers of stone, that's been interpreted to be roads and highways, but what if it just relates to drought? What if it just relates to rivers that no longer have water? Is it possible that one of the 9 signs is it relates to the drying up of the land? Because there is messaging coming out of the Hopi tradition relating to water, which I'm going to get to a little bit later. And water is the central requirement for life, for all life. There really isn't anything very much that does exist in the context that we understand reality that doesn't require water. And so if the rivers are of stone, does that mean that what was covering the stone, which was the water, may end up dissipating or evaporating because of ongoing ecological impact? And so is there a possibility that with the first world dying as a result of fire and the second world crumbling into ice, turning into crumbled ice, and the third world dying from flood, is it possible that the fourth world may die from drying all of the world's resources and ultimately becoming a massive drought? The youth with the long hair, which is the 6th sign or the next sign, coming to learn the tribal ways, this might be the hippie era. It might. Returning to simplicity, it may be from the 60s and 70s. But it may not have happened yet. Also, it might be an alternative. The thing about prophecy is cyclical. In fact, if you talk to historians, if you talk to scientists, if you talk to, anyone in a serious kind of profession of investigation, they still, in their own way and within the boundaries of their own discipline, describe reality as being cyclical. And that's another clue that prophecy may also be cyclical, which is something that I mention in my book and try to show examples of. And that's the reason it kind of increases the strength of the argument that prophecy may be providing clues about where we can interact and intervene and create positive interaction with those moments, rather than just say, oh, here it comes again, here comes a prophecy, this is what's going to happen next. it gives us an invitation to act, because perhaps the 60s was an example, but perhaps in the future, one of the things that will happen within those 9 signs within the prophecy is that those that continue up to ignore the messaging of spirit will ultimately move closer and closer away from the original teachings, and their world will end. But those that stay closer to nature, who may almost appear hippie-like in their sort of a reenactment of the previous iteration, will demonstrate their closeness to nature and spirit and the earth, and and each other, and will continue into the 5th world. So it might even be that those who survive are the ones that take the hint from the previous example of the hippie movement and end up transitioning into the 5th world. So there is possibility that when you look at the 9 signs in different order, they kind of give you a clue that this might not be the only cycle, that there are other cycles as well. We keep being invited as we spiral towards our future. The giant spiders, for example, the giant spider's web that crisscrosses across the land. Yes, I do suspect that this relates to the internet and technology, but I think there's more to it, because there are other ways to talk about the internet spreading across the land, even in indigenous ways. It could have been, a multitude of rivers or something if it's a richness, but instead it was a spider's web. And a spider's web has a purpose. Its purpose is to trap its prey. And this takes me straight to the beast in Bible prophecy. So you see, in my book, I talk about how I believe that the beast in Bible prophecy does exist. And it's an interpretation in the context of the ancient world that when we look at it today, the beast embodies the Antichrist. And, in tradition, in religion, and a lot of Christian thought, the beast is considered to be like a monster or some kind of a horrendous creature. But I increasingly believe that's not the case. And I also increasingly believe that the Antichrist is not some kind of creature either. It's an energy that lacks the Christ element, which could very well be this consciousness of divinity. The spider's web analogy that the Hopis have sounds really similar, because if the spider's web is catching its prey and it's crisscrossing over the land and capturing everyone in its web, that sounds very much like technology turning us into prey, turning us into prisoners of itself. And the replacement of the human consciousness with the artificial consciousness, which is AI, could very well be the Christ consciousness battling with the Antichrist consciousness. And so this is just another little example of where there's a tiny silver thread of, just this coming together where everything meets in a converging point. And I do suspect that the giant spider web is the trap of taking technology into a realm that turns us into its prey. So that coincides with the Hopi prophecy, it coincides with Bible prophecy, and it also coincides with the prophecy that I saw in the 80s. And so I found that to be really interesting, the web of technology. And you know what? The internet is often called the web. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Right. So the sea turning to black and many things dying. That's another of the 9 signs. Yes, ecological disaster, neglect of the environment, pollution of the earth. And it's important to remember technology looks really benign when you're sitting in front of your computer screen or your device, right? But technology is a massive polluter. And it also potentially uses up a lot of water. Artificial intelligence, its number one negative consequence is that it consumes massive amounts of water and natural resource. So when you're clicking on your keyboard, you're just one person, obviously, but artificial intelligence is being used for so many things by so many people around the world. Some are individuals, some are groups, some are corporations and industry and medicines and science and all kinds of things. When you think about how much it's being used and the degree of water that's being consumed, it coincides with the Hopi prophecy of the rivers of stone. It kind of makes me look at the prophecy in an entirely different way, where it may be warning us that our number one thing to be concerned about is water. The lack of water and the impact of this web that consumes us like we're prey, kind of like the internet web, consumes so much water that we become trapped in an environment where in order to survive, we actually have to rethink how we're going to be responding to technology in order to sustain ourselves with the water that we need to survive, that everything on earth needs to survive. And then, of course, the final sign is the dwelling in space that falls with a great crash. This is interpreted to be relating to a blue star prediction, and it marks the end of the fourth world and the purification and commencement of the fifth world. Okay. So this is the intervention that many people say is coming, and that it's marked by the blue star, which people said in the 70s may have been Skylab. But perhaps it's not. And once again, it may also be, just like the hippie movement, it may have been an example of something that is cyclical. Perhaps there is another blue star or blue glowing light that marks the purification, the moment that it begins. It might be a visitation of some kind. So in the Chris Bledsoe Lady in White example, this is a prediction that's made by the Lady in White and translated by Chris Bledsoe, where he says that during a time of great upheaval, there will be indisputable proof of the fact that we're not alone, and that it'll come with a great crash. Okay, the blue star in the Hopi prophecy is also coming with a great crash, and it's going to be glowing. The Chris Bledsoe Lady in White prediction is that there's going to be missiles that are destroyed by an angelic force, which would be a great crash in front of everyone in a way that's undeniable. And there is also an association with there being a revelation of humanity's secrets, where we're being advised of who we really are and where we really come from and what the lies are that we've been told. It'll be undeniable. And this is something that seems to sit quite squarely with the Hopi prophecy as well, because it splits the earth into two. Those that have been kept busy with distractions will suddenly be aware of the truth. It doesn't mean that they will see it. They may not see the truth in the sky. They might see the truth within because of some fundamental shift in perspective. But it might be that they sit in the sky as well. And then there will be those that will be exposed for who they are. Not exposed to us and each other. I think exposed to and by spirit. Because they will be the ones who can't hide. One group survives and the others don't. This is really interesting. The Hopi prophecy is one of the indigenous prophecies that I find really, really fascinating, because there's information out there about it that can be researched and interpreted and analyzed and compared against other things. And I always like to look at things in that way, so that I can kind of try and pick out areas where I wonder. So I'm not saying that any of this is perfectly aligned and that I have the answer. It's more that I think we need to kind of re-examine, is it really a done deal? Have these things really happened, or are they examples, these 9 signs, of things that can reoccur that we should look out for? And should the 9 signs sometimes be considered in a different order to see whether or not they are even more relevant to the modern day when we reorder them? So the prophecy is not considered to be a fixed timeline. And it's not a message of doom either. What the Hopi Prophecy is, it's a moral compass. And I think all of prophecy is a moral compass. It gives us, as I said, points of intersection where we can have a positive influence or a negative influence, depending on how we interact and plan and design based on the choices that we make at each of those intersection points. It's a story of 2 different paths that humanity can follow collectively and individually. One that's between greed and division, and the other that's about balance and spiritual awakening. But have you noticed that the greed and division sit together? So you may be poor, but if you have a division in your heart, you may end up going the same path as the greedy folk. The balance and spiritual awakening is about this truth that we're all interdependent, and that is every human, whether we like them or not, whether we agree with them or not, and every animal and every being and everything that exists in reality, we're all part of the same thing. We're all aspects of each other and ourselves. And that is probably the source of the spiritual awakening. The awareness of that is what opens up the truth inside us. This is something that is also, I've had consistent messaging when I've been doing my tarot readings, messaging from the cards, which seems to be the same as what the prophecy states. And I'm going to prove that because I'm actually going to, at the end of this episode, read a word-for-word message that comes from one of the tribal elders. Just recently, I think it was in 2008, and I'm going to read that word for word, and you'll be able to see that when I'm seeing these things, I'm seeing them because they have been said. The cards have often said, consistently said, whenever I ask, what's going to happen in the future and how can we get out of this dilemma that we're in, whatever that dilemma is, the cards always say that we have a choice. We have a choice. And more, it appears that regardless of how we're waiting for others to save us, whether it be another country or another leader or just another person or another species or something, they may come and help to enlighten us. But we are our saviors. We are the ones who are our saviors. And I also think that that coincides with the original intention of biblical prophecy as well. Because if we are the Christ consciousness that gives us a divine link, then we are also our savior. And the Gnostics kind of believe that too. Putting the responsibility onto a man such as Jesus wasn't the original messaging from Scripture. It was the interpretation of Scripture. And the Hopi belief system seems to coincide with that. There is I mentioned in an earlier episode, probably just a few days ago, about a fellow called Lee Harris who claims to channel entities, either multi-dimensional or extraterrestrial entities called the Z's. And if you like channelers like Daryl Anker, who channels Bashar and things like that, you probably would like Lee Harris as well. He's British, I think. Anyway, he sounds British anyway. And the Z's have a very similar messaging to what Bashar has, and also to the things that I've covered here on the show as well. And that is that humanity is overcomplicating things. We kind of are overanalyzing and pulling things to pieces and saying, this person's good, this one's bad, this idea is good, this one's bad, I'm okay because I do this, but I have a judgment on others and therefore, but it doesn't matter because, I'm still better, so it's okay. And this person is has a problem because of this or that or the other, and we're slicing each other up a lot, when in fact it's a bit like saying this finger's good, this one's bad, this one's good, this one's bad. It kind of doesn't make any sense because it's all one person. The world might just split into two, and the energy that we align with our consciousness, that we align to with our consciousness, might determine where we go, regardless of whether we're a good or a bad person. And that's one of the reasons why it's really important to get a sense of understanding of what it is that we align to. We don't have to be perfect people because we're human. We were made to be imperfect because that way we learn our lessons over the various incarnations. But do we align with a positive energy or do we align with a negative energy? I wouldn't think of it in terms of good or bad. I would think of it in terms of positive building energy or negative destruction energy. And if you hate something and want to resist it, then what you kind of want to do is you want to damage it. That sounds a little bit negative. If you want to build love and unity and don't have any rules associated with who is invited, that sounds a lot more positive. I mean, it's all, I'm an imperfect being and I'm sure that there's nuances there that I haven't quite caught yet. However, aligning with the positive and being an imperfect person sounds like you kind of would be given a chance, because the Hopi Prophecy also says every person, spirit will judge every person based not only on their actions, but their intentions as well. And if you are a lovely person, but have an intention of control over something that separates you from the collective, how would that be interpreted? And if you are a deeply flawed person, but in your heart there's a positive desire to bring unity, you just have a really flawed way of kind of doing it, does that determine you as being a negative or a positive? I'm not sure that we understand what it takes to be the kind of person who gets to continue into the fifth world. And so for me, I like to think of it very simply. It's either aligning with a positive building kind of unity or aligning with a negative separation and division and kind of fear or distrust. And I'm going to always try to go what I believe is positive, but your belief might be different. What we continue to focus on will continue to thrive. And it's really interesting to note that you don't see many Hopis focusing on the things that they hate. And so this might be something that needs more investigation. Can you hear the rain? My dog is going to be absolutely drenched when she gets home, which probably is going to be any second now, I would say, because nobody wants to be out there with the dogs right now. But you know what? There is a message of hope in the Hopi Prophecy. And I think it's wonderful that it's called the Hopi Prophecy. Perhaps that's the reason why, because there is a message of hope here. I think it's very relevant for today, more so than ever before, perhaps, because I do think maybe there's an indication that we're creeping towards the end of the fourth world, which is inevitable. But the inevitability of the fifth world, that's the question mark. The Hopi are not saying in their belief and teachings that we should give up. What they're saying is that we should wake up. We should wake up. The fifth world is not automatic. It is something that is chosen by our choices that we make in life and which direction and which path we choose to go in. They teach that the small, sustainable communities, spiritual enlightenment, and honoring all beings, as though they are our relatives. Well, that's a funny little language because you know what? Some relatives are better than others. Let's just tweak that a little bit. Honoring all living beings as though they are us. Ourselves. There you go. to be relatives. I know a couple of crazy relatives, but and I think everyone does. But I think the message is basically not to judge others, to recognize and honor the fact that they might have their own unique individual thing about them that we either love or we hate, but to honor that anyway, because they are as much a part of our existence and reality and our central soul as we are. And that, along with keeping things small and sustainable and aligning ourselves to a positive spiritual framework, is really very small things that are being asked by Spirit in order to take us into our new existence. So I talked about this message that was shared with the Hopi Elder. This is actually a very famous message. It aligns to what I currently understand from all the research and everything that I've been doing, and from the readings that I've done here on the channel for the past 5 years that have been consistently saying the same thing, to the frustration of many people, I'm sure. Here is the entire message, which was shared on the 8th of June, 2020. I'm going to read it out word for word, and I've taken this message from a website called awaken.org. But you can also find it. It's open source, and you can find it on archives.org and other open source websites. So let me read this for you. This is word for word. You have been telling people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell the people that this is the hour, and there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? Where is your water? Know your garden. It's time to speak your truth. Create your community. Be good to each other, and do not look outside yourself for your leader. And then he clasped his hands together and smiled and said, this could be a good time. There is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel they are being torn apart and will suffer greatly. No, the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above the water. And I say, see who is in there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey come to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Can you hear all of the messages in this short message from the tribal elder on the 8th of June 2008 that coincide with all of the very detailed messaging that I've been able to accumulate over the past 5 years? There are some central themes here. And those themes are, what are your relationships? What are you doing? How are you living? Where is your water? I think that's a clue. Speak your truth. Be good to each other. There's no exceptions there. Be good to each other. And very importantly, do not look outside of yourself for your leader. You are the leader that you're looking for. You are the savior that you're looking for. This could be a very good time. The river is flowing fast and it's scary, but it doesn't have to be. Just push off into the future and trust that if you follow the path, we'll get there. Take nothing personally, least of all yourself. As soon as you feel like a victim, what this means, it means as soon as you feel like a victim, then your journey will come to a halt. The lone wolf, which also is part of this sort of singular kind of victim of everything else perspective, that time is over. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. And there's so many different messages here about celebrating rather than fighting, and taking each other as a group without any judgment, and remembering that we are the ones that we're waiting for. That is a direct quote. Don't take my word for it. If you want to retain this message and put it up somewhere so that you can remind yourself about the wisdom from this message, just so you can either go to awaken.org, you can go to archives.org, or you can just do a search and use the phrase, "We are the ones we're waiting for, Hopi," or something like that. And you will find plenty of online resources that have that direct quote. I'm personally going to be printing that out and putting it somewhere for when I have those moments where I need reassurance. I think that today's episode shows that we are in the middle of a cycle that is providing us with clues. And the major clue to digest is that we are the chosen ones. We are the saviors and we are the heroes. And the truth is that that resides inside us. We need to find it. And when we find it, we will become unstoppable. We will become collectively empowered. Our perspective will be changed. And that's our future. If you are engaged with or have personal experience of or have witnessed wonderful building exercises that are taking place in your part of the world, no matter where it is, leave comments and share that information with us. It doesn't matter where in the world it is. This is a place where you can leave that information in the comments, and I will help to promote it by picking a few here and there and talking about them every single week. I've also decided to include guided meditations. And they're going to have different themes. I hope that they turn out to be successful. And this will be for the moments where you just need a bit of quiet and peace. And I've actually consulted with a friend of mine who is a counselor and a hypnotist. And so these guided meditations will include subtle suggestions for unity and peace and positivity and positive, constructive movement forward. And so if that's something that you'd like help with, it's a very subtle thing. I'm not a hypnotist and I'm not going to change your brain or anything, but all they do is they help to reassure and help to realign. And depending on whatever theme you need, as the body of guided meditations increase in the playlist, you'll be able to choose whatever it is that suits you based on the title that resonates with you the most. And I'm going to do my best to make sure that they're ad-free so that you don't get interrupted with some kind of snake oil commercial in the middle of your meditation. I can't speak for YouTube, but I'm going to do whatever I can anyway. This is Ellie Dreams Down Under. Thank you so much for your support of the channel. If you've enjoyed today's episode or you feel as though you've learned something, please consider subscribing. Leave a comment, press like, share the video with friends and people that you think would benefit from the messaging. So thank you very much for watching and supporting the channel. And that was a lengthy goodbye, but you know what? It's me. And you know I have a tendency to waffle. I love knowing you're here, and I'll see you in my dreams.